Why is nobody watching domestic club rugby around the world? What's going on? After coming off the World Cup when millions of people, we've had record viewing figures from around the world, why is it that momentum has not been carried through into the domestic competitions? That's what I want to get into on this video, and that's where I want to start a conversation in the comments, because I'm just going to throw some ideas out there. I don't totally know what's going on. I've got some thoughts, but I'd love to know yours. So get stuck in the comments, give the video a thumbs up, because that's helped spread the word about the channel. It's just me here talking rugby. I'm Tim, this is Egg Chasers, and as always, as I say, please, I would love it if I could get your subscription on the channel. If I haven't already, maybe this will be the video that earns your subscription. So I mentioned those record viewing figures for the Rugby World Cup. I was out in France for 7 weeks. It was amazing. France were a brilliant host country, but that positivity wasn't just within France, it went everywhere. But certainly in France, the viewing figures were absolutely incredible. For that opening night game against New Zealand, 15 million people tuned in to watch, which is bonkers. Only bettered in France by that quarter-final night against South Africa, where 16.5 million people tuned in. That's insane and absolutely fantastic. But it was translated across the world, where in South Africa, very nearly 11 million people tuned in to the Rugby World Cup final. That is a whole 26% higher, by the way, than the Football World Cup final last year. In Ireland, which heavily fancied before the tournament, great relationship between the national team and the fans. 1.4 million people very nearly tuned in for their quarter-final exit against New Zealand. England had record figures, nearly 9 million viewers watched them against South Africa in the semi-final. And in New Zealand, 1.5 million people watched that Rugby World Cup final, which relative to the size of New Zealand in the population, that is a solid number of people. So just to summarise that, this is 5 countries that all have good domestic competitions and domestic teams and good international sides as well. And that was their viewing figures for the Rugby World Cup final. Some very, very good numbers there. So whenever a Rugby World Cup finishes, as rugby fans, we hope that means there's going to be loads more kids turning up at the local rugby club. There's going to be loads more people taking an interest in the sport, and there's going to be loads more people watching the domestic rugby offering. So what is actually going on there? Well, Super Rugby. It's quite hard to actually get your hands on the actual data for this one. So you might know some numbers that I haven't been able to find, but the numbers I have been able to find, it's all a bit sketchy, is that around about 200,000 people watched the Super Rugby final in New Zealand, and that would be Super Rugby viewing on a good day. It has been lower than that in recent years, so about 200,000. And a reminder that 1.5 million people watched New Zealand in the Rugby World Cup final. So that's quite a small ratio of people that watch the World Cup final that don't bother watching Super Rugby. And that is a trend which continues when you look at the URC. The final between Stormers and Munster was watched. It had a peak audience of 1 million, and the average playoff game was around about 500,000 to 600,000. So compare that to a combined, if you combine, I'm going to take Wales, Scotland, Italy out of the equation here, the other nations in the URC, and just focus on Ireland and South Africa. They have the 2 teams in the final. They're the 2 best national sides as well. And their combined audience for Rugby World Cup matches was around 12 odd million. The combined audience for the URC final, around about 1 million. So a 12-to-1 ratio, which is quite a big drop off. Now, I think a part of that is it's a new competition. Things are still bedding in. The rivalries aren't established. So you've got to give that one time. But it's definitely got a lot of space to grow, and I certainly hope that it does. As for the English Premiership, again, I found it quite hard to get details on the 2023 Premiership Cup final viewing figures. I think part of that might be because it's Saracens versus Sale, 2 of the poorest supported teams in the league, and consequently I reckon the viewing figures would have been down on last year when it was Saracens against Leicester, one of the best supported, well, the best supported club in English rugby, Leicester Tigers. So all I know is that last year's final, Leicester v Saracens, had just shy of 1 million viewers. Compare that to almost 9 million viewers for the Rugby World Cup, and it's about a 9-to-1 ratio between people watching England at the World Cup and watching English domestic rugby's biggest match. And then you move to France, where the top 14 final between Toulouse and La Rochelle, an amazing game, broke a record for viewing figures in nearly 10 years, with between them Canal Plus, the subscription service, and France 2, the terrestrial domestic service, getting very nearly 6 million viewers watching that final, when the highest viewing for France at the World Cup was 16.5 million. That's a 3-to-1 ratio. Let me summarise that. New Zealand and Ireland, South Africa are kind of similar ratios between people that watch the domestic competition and watch international rugby. England, slightly better, 9-to-1 ratio-ish, 8-9-to-1. But France, nearly a third of the people, a third as many people who watched them in the World Cup, watched that top 14 final. So what is going on? Because these are comparable, you know. Every single one of these countries, well, certainly England, Ireland, South Africa, have got subscription and terrestrial free-to-air services going on for this. I'm not sure about New Zealand. I think it's just Sky Sports, isn't it? Which is behind a paywall, which would explain that for a rugby fanatical country. But there's definitely something going on in France that is better than anywhere else in the world, and I think it's worth examining what that might be. When you look at the top 14, it feels at the minute like there's just a magnetism. All the great players from around the world are wanting to go there and play. The money is in France. Certainly England are having a player drain to France, which you think could accelerate and could get worse. There's talk about the English salary cap being moved back up to try and combat that, but we will see. Maro Itoje could well be playing there next year, for example. Jack Willis, Henry Arundel are already there. And yeah, there's just something going on that's very, very good. And I think it's something I've covered on the channel before. Everything is very joined up in France. They have a TV deal that means there's rugby on Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday across the Pro D2 and the top 14. There's a whole league pyramid and the money gets filtered down. It's not all kept within the big clubs. It gets filtered down because the big clubs know that if the ones below are doing well, then that is going to mean you've got a healthy, firstly, grassroots. There's a lot of investment gone on at grassroots level in France. There's a lot of youth and coaching infrastructure and money that's been spent. That's part of the reason why you've got maybe the best French team of all time. Haven't delivered on that ability yet, but you think they will in the future. And that is why they've got a thriving top end of the game with teams that are winning Heineken Champions Cups full of the best players in the world. And it just feels joined up. And I think above all, when I was in France for 7 weeks, they just celebrate the sport for what it is. And they absolutely love the sport. In France, I mentioned this on a video recently, in France, they love the scrum. They love massive hits. They love people getting smashed in a tackle. Legally, they love people getting smashed. They love giant men, and they also love the silky skills and all the rest of it, of course, but they love it all. Let's jump around some of those other countries and see what's going on. So URC, yeah, there isn't as much emotional investment from outside of Ireland anyway in these teams because, I don't know, a lot of these, there just isn't a history in some of these sides in the way that there is in those Irish provinces. This goes around Wales, Scotland, Italy. It will get, I do think it will get there. I think being spread out across multiple continents and hours to fly to places, it doesn't mean you, it's harder to get a grasp on and build up some of those rivalries. The games between sides within each country are kind of the best ones of the year, the ones you really look forward to. It is getting better, and I do love seeing those big Irish provinces going up against the South African sides as well, for example. That has stepped it up massively. I was a bit dubious at first. I'm much more positive than I was since then, and I think it will get better over time. When you look at Super Rugby, obviously they've lost the South African sides. It's kind of dominated by New Zealand at the minute. We need a strong Australia. They're not there at the minute. There's the Pacific Nations sides that are expanding it slightly. We don't have Argentina in the mix anymore, so it's not quite as exciting as it. The storylines aren't there in the same way. It's basically generally speaking, except for the Brumbies who've actually competed a little bit, it's just a little battle for who's going to wear the New Zealand All Black jersey between those All Black teams, who are easily the best sides that there are. When you look to the English Premiership, I've mentioned this before, when I've looked at the English Premiership, it's such a good product. Last weekend we had all these derby matches, Bath versus Gloucester, Leicester versus Northampton, and yet what you get relentlessly in the news, when you get far more coverage of all of the negative things associated with rugby than any of the stories about the great stuff on the pitch. Rugby is, if you read the news, rugby is racist, rugby is sexist, rugby has loads of online abuse, rugby is homophobic, rugby has toxic masculinity in it, rugby has a drinking problem, the scrum is boring and people don't like it, all the laws are terrible, the concussions the fans are dreadful, the concussion is a massive problem that's leading to bad things, and rugby's dangerous and maybe kids shouldn't play it, and be careful, you might have long-term health issues if you play rugby. It's just constant negativity, and that's what I see from where I sit, and it's in stark contrast to the fact that when I was out in France, what I was seeing was a nation that just loved it. They would never complain about the scrum in France. They love the scrum. They don't shy away from the fact that rugby's dangerous. It is. That rugby has huge physical contact in it. It does. Everyone that plays it knows that. Everyone that watches it knows that. In fact, that's one of the reasons why we watch it, which a lot of people seem scared to say. I'm not. It's one of the reasons I play it. And when I look at other sports around the world which are growing, much like rugby is in France, which is thriving, UFC, talk about dangerous sports. Does it get more dangerous and more violent, more risky for the people involved than UFC? But it is absolutely thriving. And why? Because that is a sport that knows what it is, knows why people watch it, knows why people enjoy it, and does not shy away from it. And in Dana White, there's a lot of things you might not like about the guy, but one thing I do like about him as the leader of that sport is that whenever anyone comes to him with a negative story, he just says, not interested, go away. If you don't like the sport, don't watch the sport. And I've used this example before as well, darts, which is, you know, a crazy sport to bring up, not the most athletically, you don't need the most athletic prowess to play darts. It is thriving. I think, what were the numbers? Something like 20 years ago, the PDC final was watched by 200,000 people. Now it's watched by 2 million people every year. And why? Because it knows what it is. It knows why people come and watch it, and it doesn't shy away from that. It knows that people just want to come for a night out and, yes, have a few drinks, and they don't shy away from it. In fact, they make that a feature of the whole experience of the sport itself. And I think you can make a great case for rugby if you leaned into why people like it, why people play it, why people watch it. And I think you can sell the sport for all of the great things that we know there is. The fans are fantastic. The camaraderie between them is special and rare. We saw that all through the World Cup. In fact, on this channel, so much of the effort I put in to put videos up was to try and showcase what makes rugby unique and special, and the fans are at the heart of that. Rugby is a sport for big, tough men who, yes, put themselves in harm's way, and I don't think we should shy away from that fact. Measures have been put in place to minimise the risk, but you cannot eliminate the risk, and we shouldn't even try to, because the risk is the reward. That is why most of us played it in the first place. That's what we get out of it. That is the physical challenge that we like, and that's why it requires that discipline and that teamwork and that courage and bravery and stoicism, and those are what make rugby what it is. And I think if we just lean into that, then I think everyone can follow the model that France has set, and we can go places, which is what we all want. We all want as many people as possible to love rugby. For as much as anything, that means that more people will come and enjoy this channel. And if you've enjoyed this video, I hope I will earn your subscription on it. I will see you on the next one. Let me know what you think in the comments.